Hey there, everybody. How y'all doing today? I'm glad that we're able to get back together again and to continue our study of Exodus and Moses in Exodus. And when we left off last time, we had just finished chapter 20 in Exodus, where God gave Moses and the Israelites the 10 words, the 10 words of God, the 10 commandments. And we looked at that in some detail and also looked at some of the things that happened immediately after God gave Moses the 10 commandments. And so now we are fast forwarding to chapter 32 of Exodus, where we find another important milestone in the experience of Moses in Exodus. So, if we were going to say that the high point of what Moses did in Exodus were the deliverance of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt through the plagues, through the Passover, through the parting of the sea, then and through receiving the Ten Commandments on the top of Mount Sinai. Then we would have to look at chapter 32 and what is happening here as perhaps the low point, one of the lowest points, if not the lowest point of Moses, of his ministry and of his service to the Lord in relation to getting the Israelites from Egypt to the promised land. Because if you look in your Bible, it probably says the same thing that my Bible does when it comes to chapter 32. And the heading there is the golden calf. The golden calf. So even people who don't know their Bible all of that well, or who don't know a lot about Moses, there are a handful of things they know. They know about the plagues, they know about the parting of the sea, they know about the Ten Commandments, and they know about the golden calf. So this is one of those things uh, that is kind of common knowledge among Christians and non-Christians, certainly Jews, about Moses, and that is the struggle that he had with the Israelites when it comes to the golden calf. So let's look at that now. That's going to be the topic of our study today in chapter 32. But before we start in verse 1 of 32, I want to back up one verse, and I want to look at chapter 31, verse 18, which is the final verse of chapter 31, because verse 18 of 31 kind of sets the context for what comes, what we see happen in chapter 32. So, chapter 31, verse 18 of Exodus, it says, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai. So, in other words, when God had finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the two tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written by the finger of God. So here we have Moses. He's at the pinnacle of Mount Sinai. He's at the top of Mount Sinai, and God has just finished speaking with him. He's been up there for 40 days, and God has spoken to him for those 40 days about many different things, including what the tabernacle should look like when they build the tabernacle in the wilderness. And at the very end of that, as the culmination of that time that they spent together, God himself writes the Ten Commandments on two tablets of stone. God writes it with his own finger, and he gives that to Moses to bring to the people. And so just think about how Moses felt at this point. He had to be excited. He had to be upbeat. He had to be walking on air. He's had 40 days alone with God. He's heard God's voice speak to him directly. He's seen God's finger write the Ten Commandments and bring out these 2 stone tablets for him to bring to the people. And Moses has to be so excited and upbeat and ready to go down to the people at the bottom of Mount Sinai and celebrate with them all the wonderful things that God is doing, that God has promised, and that they and all the wonderful relationship that they'll be able to have with the Lord as they obey Him, because the 10 Commandments and the law that God has given to Moses during these 40 days, it's a covenant, it's a promise. God is promising the people, if you obey me, if you do what you've promised to do, which is to follow me and obey me, then I promise to do these things for you, and basically take you to the promised land, bless you, make you my people, and so on and so forth. So at this point, Moses has to be really excited and ready to go, hyped up and ready to go down. He's at the top of the mountain, not only in terms of physically at the top of the mountain, but emotionally and spiritually and every other way. He's having a mountaintop experience, and he's ready to go down and celebrate with his people what God has done and is promising to do for them. Well, if we could stop there, we would be happy, and we could say it'd be nice to be able to say, and they lived happily ever after. But unfortunately, we have to now deal with chapter 32. So let's look at that for just a few minutes. Chapter 32, verse 1 says, "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us a god who will go before us, for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him.'" So at this point, chapter 32, so the end of chapter 31, I think, is the 40th day that Moses has been on the top of Mount Sinai. But the beginning of chapter 32, verse 1, I think, takes us back one day. But what happens in chapter 32, verse 1, at this point, Moses has been at the top of the mountain 39 days. 39 days Moses has been at the top of the mountain. If only the people could have waited one more day, things would have been completely different. But 39 days into Moses being up there, and they are concerned. They are distraught. They are at the end of their rope. Their patience has come to an end, and they are panicking right now. And you wonder, well, why? After 39 days, were they demanding that Aaron make them a god or gods? And notice that they're not asking Aaron to do this. They're demanding. They go to Aaron and say, "You, Aaron, make us a god who will go before us." Not, will you do it? Should you do it? Does God want us to do it? We have no indication at all that they've prayed about it, that they've asked for direction. They didn't come to Aaron and ask him for guidance. They have gone and they're putting this pressure on Aaron that he has to make them a God who will go before them. And they're panicked because they don't know what to do without a leader like Moses. So think about that for just a minute. Why did they feel this way? Why were they panicking like this? Why were they coming to Aaron after 39 days and demanding some type of a leader? They want God. They want an image of God who will go before them and lead them and ostensibly provide for them and keep them safe and defend them and fight their battles and take them to the promised land through the wilderness that, they don't know what's out there. They don't know what's before them. They don't know what the future holds. And they are afraid to face the future on their own. Well, if you think about it, these people have been in slavery in Egypt for 400 years. They have never known life without someone to provide for them. And it seems weird, but when they were in Egypt in slavery, Pharaoh did provide for them. Now, he was a terrible taskmaster, and life was awful for them. And slavery was a very difficult thing, and something they prayed about, asked God to deliver them from. And life in enslavement is a terrible, awful thing, especially when the person that you're enslaved to is harsh and terrible. And this is the way Pharaoh was. But on the other hand, Pharaoh was, in essence, meeting their basic needs. He provided for their basic needs. And then when they left Egypt under Moses, Moses was the one, actually, God was the one who was meeting their needs, but they saw it as coming from Moses. You know, Moses, God, provided for them in terms of their deliverance from Egypt. He gave them manna to eat, he gave them water, he divided the sea for them and got them across. He's brought them to Mount Sinai. So they've gone from Pharaoh as being their provider, as it were, to Moses being their provider from the hand of God. And now, basically, they need someone else. They're afraid to face the future without someone else to meet their needs. And who do they want? They want a God to do that. So they come to Aaron and they're telling him that this is what they want him to do. So the next question I have is, why Aaron? Why have they come to him in particular to ask him to be the one to do this for them? Well, I think there are a few reasons, but I think the one that you've probably thought of right off the bat is, well, Aaron is Moses' brother, and that, I'm sure, had something to do with it. They saw Moses and Aaron as a package deal, that they were kind of, right hand, left hand kind of thing. Moses was clearly the leader. He was clearly the one that God was speaking to. But Aaron was, number two in that relationship. It was God and Moses, and then Moses and Aaron. So, God had even said that, Moses, I'm going to make you as though you were a God, as though you were God to Aaron. So the people see this dynamic. He's Moses' brother. He's Moses' right-hand man. When you see Moses, you see Aaron. Aaron actually held the staff during the plagues. Aaron actually spoke for Moses during the time of the interaction with Pharaoh. So they see Aaron as a lifted up person in God's sight, and Moses' right hand man. They're a package deal. So and he's Moses' brother. So that's one reason they would have come to Aaron. Another reason is because they believe that Aaron has seen God himself. So who would you go to make an image of God more so than you would go to the person who you think has seen God? So if you want an image of God, you would go to the person who you think has seen God. So why did they think that Aaron has seen God? Well, we're going to find it in Exodus chapter 24. So if you want to turn in your Bible to Exodus chapter 24, we're going to take a look at that here for just a little bit to see how this happened. So it's in Exodus chapter 24, and we're going to start with verse 9 of Exodus 24. And it says in verse 9 of Exodus 24, then Moses went up on top, up Mount Sinai. Moses went up Mount Sinai with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. So we don't know exactly what Aaron and the 70 elders and Moses saw when they went up on Mount Sinai, and they saw this representation of God. It was some type of a semblance of God. It wouldn't be God directly himself, because we know that we learn elsewhere in the Bible that no man has ever seen God other than Jesus himself. And we know also that if a man is to see God directly, then that man will die. You can't see God without death being a part of it, because it's just too much for us to take in our humanity. But that's not to say that we can't see some representation of God, something that is like God, some semblance of the Lord. As a matter of fact, they specifically talk about here in chapter 24 that they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. So maybe they just saw where he stood. Maybe just seeing where God stood was enough of an experience of having seen God in some way, some representation, some semblance of God. So they certainly didn't look at God directly, but they saw God, or some representation of God in some way that it made a huge difference in their lives. And this had gotten back to the people, that Aaron was among the people who had gone up with Moses on Mount Sinai, and that these people as a group had seen God in some way. And it says in verse 11 there, yet God did not reach out with his hand against the nobles of the sons of Israel, and they saw God again. They saw God, and they ate and they drank. So they were joyful. They were joyful that they had seen God in some way. Maybe just seeing the pavement where he stood, the clear sapphire, was enough of an overwhelming experience to them, that they were so joyful, and they celebrated that, and they ate and they drank, and God did not lay his hand upon them to judge them in any way for seeing this representation of him, because he thought it was he basically is sanctioning it and saying that is acceptable. So in some way, the people come to Moses because he's Moses' right hand man. He's Moses' brother. He is one of the, he is one of the top two people in the Israelites, in the way they see the relationship with God. It's God, Moses, and Aaron at this point. But also they think that, or they know that Aaron has in some way seen God. So if they want God, if they want an image of a God to take them, to go before them to the promised land, then Aaron is the one to do it, because Aaron has seen God in this way. Another thing, though, is that Moses actually left instructions with the people that should some difficulty arise, that Aaron is the one that they should go to. And that's also here in chapter 24 of Exodus. So let's continue reading there. Let's go to verse 12 of chapter 24. It says, now the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and stay there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and the commandments which I have written for their instruction. So Moses got up along with Joshua his servant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. So the way you need to see this is that when it says that Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of the elders went up, they didn't go all the way to the top of Mount Sinai. They went part of the way up, which is where they saw this representation of the Lord and celebrated by having this where they ate and they drank and they celebrated that. And then they're there for a while, and then God says to Moses, I want you to come farther up with me. Come farther up the mountain. So here we have Moses, and Moses took Joshua with him, and Joshua and Moses went up farther towards the top of Mount Sinai. Not all the way to the top with Moses, but farther up than Aaron and Abihu and Nadab and the 70 elders. They stayed behind while Moses and Joshua went up farther. And so it says they went up, Moses and Joshua went up the mountain of God. But to the elders, so Moses, as he's departing the elders and Aaron and going with Joshua up higher, he leaves some parting instructions behind. As he's leaving, it says in verse 14, but to the elders Moses said, "Wait here for us until we return to you, and behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a legal matter, have him approach them." So, in other words, as he leaves, he tells the elders, if there's a situation with the people, if there's something that comes up, there's some problem, there's some difficulty, have them go to Aaron. Go to Aaron, and he will handle it. So these are the three reasons, I think, why the people turn to Aaron in this situation. One is that he was Moses' brother and his right-hand man. Secondly, they believe that he has seen God on Mount Sinai. And then thirdly, Moses himself has said to them that if there's a problem, if there's a situation, if you have some type of difficulty, then go to Aaron and he will handle it for you. So let's go ahead and continue, because there's something else that goes on here in chapter 24 that I think also addresses something that we see happening here in verse 1 of chapter 32. So we're back in chapter 24 again of Exodus, and let's pick this up at verse 15. It says, "Then Moses went up to the mountain." So now Moses is going up to, and Moses and Joshua are going up farther up the mountain. "And the cloud covered the mountain." This is the darkness of God, the darkness and the cloud and the veil that covered God when he came to the top of the mountain. Verse 16, "The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, on the very top of Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days." So Joshua and Moses go up. The darkness of God, the glory of God comes down to the top of Mount Sinai, and they wait. Moses and Joshua wait for 6 days while this is all taking place. They don't go quite to the top. They're higher than Aaron and Abihu and Nadab, but they're not all the way to the top yet. But they go a little bit farther up, and they wait there for 6 days while all of this happens at the top of Mount Sinai, when God comes to the top of Mount Sinai. And then it says, on the seventh day, and isn't that interesting? On the seventh day, the Sabbath day, on the Sabbath day, the seventh day, the day which is the day that we are to celebrate being God's people and being in his presence and our relationship with him. On that day, on the seventh Sabbath day, God called to Moses from the midst of the cloud, and to the eyes of the sons of Israel. Now, the sons of Israel are on the bottom of Mount Sinai at this point, but they can see what's going on at the top of Mount Sinai with God's presence being up there. "And to the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of the Lord at the top of Mount Sinai was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop." It looked like a fire that was just consuming the mountain. It looked like this was a fire, that God's glory settling on the top of Mount Sinai was like a consuming fire. What's a consuming fire? A consuming fire is a forest fire. It's a fire that's consuming the mountain, and they think that it's a deadly fire. You see a consuming fire, you think you're gonna die, that it's going to create a disaster. So anyway, this is what they're seeing at the bottom of Mount Sinai. And then it says in verse 18, "Then Moses entered the midst of the cloud as he went up to the mountain." And so here we have the final stage of Moses going to the top of the mountain 39 days ago. It was the 70 elders and Aaron and Joshua and all of those guys went part of the way up where they saw God. And then Moses and Joshua go a little bit farther up where they wait 6 days for God's appearance and glory to settle on the mountain. And then on the seventh day, God calls Moses to the very, very top of the mountain. Not Joshua, he stays there. But God calls Moses to come to the very top of the mountain, to go into that consuming fire, into that glory, and to enter into that, to be in the presence of God. And Joshua stays and watches and waits. The elders stay and watch and wait. The people at the bottom of Mount Sinai watch and wait thinking that that Moses has walked into this consuming, devastating fire. And it says, then it goes on that, and Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So when it says here let's go back here to chapter 32, verse 1 for a minute. It says, when the people said why they wanted Aaron to make this image of God for them, they say, come, make us a God who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. We do not know what has happened to him. He was up there for 39 days. We know that he's walked up and to the top of this mountain. He's in the midst of this consuming fire, and we don't know. We don't know what has happened to him, but we don't think that he's coming back. So what they're basically saying in essence is, we don't think he's coming back. If they thought that he was coming back, they would have waited for him. But the fact that after 39 days they go to Aaron and demand a God to provide for them, to direct them and to help them and to meet their needs, means that they have lost hope that Moses is going to return. So let's think about this for just a minute. What could they have thought? What could they have thought that maybe happened to Moses at the top of Mount Sinai? What are some possible things that may have been running through their minds at that point in time? I think there are a handful of things that they might have been thinking. One is they might have been thinking that he had perished, that he had died, that this consuming fire up on the top of Mount Sinai that he walked into directly has consumed him, and that he has passed away on the top of the mountain there in God's glory, and that he is not going to return. Another possibility is that maybe they were thinking that he had been translated into heaven without dying. This is something that had precedence for them. In Genesis, they had the example of Enoch, who had been taken to heaven without dying. Enoch was a man who walked with God, the Bible says, and he walked with God right into the gates of heaven. God took Enoch to heaven without Enoch experiencing death. So maybe they were thinking, hey, Moses is of the same kind of person that Enoch was, that God speaks to him, that God walks with him, that God has this close relationship with him, and maybe God has done for Moses what he did for Enoch and has taken him to heaven without experiencing death. In either case, whether he's died or he's just been taken to heaven, in either case, he's not coming back. Another possibility, and this would really just be for the conspiratorial people in the group of the Israelites that were waiting at the base of the mountain, is that maybe they were thinking that he had given up on them, that he had returned to his family, who lived there. If you remember, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness of Midian with a wife and children and a father-in-law, and he worked for 40 years as a shepherd in that area. So maybe they think that Moses has gone back to his family in some other part of Midian, and that he basically has gone back to being a shepherd, and that he's deserted them and he's not returning to them. And then I think the fourth possibility, and I think this probably describes the Levites who were there. So we know in this crowd of people, maybe 2 million people that had come out of Egypt with Moses to come to the promised land and to come to Sinai, that the large bulk of those people were Israelites, were Jewish people. But there were also some people who were not Jewish, who were Egyptian or maybe other nationalities, who decided to leave Egypt with the Israelites, with Moses. because life for them in Egypt was not good either. And so they saw what the God of Moses had done in Egypt, that he had the power and the control, and that if he was leading them to some promised land, they wanted to come too. And they believed in that God enough to put their faith in him that he would get them there. But they were not Jewish people per se. And maybe those are the ones who thought that maybe Moses had gone on to back to his family. Maybe they were the ones thinking that number three option was probably what happened to him. And then there were the Levites, and Moses was of the tribe of Levi. He was a Levite. We know, as we'll find later on, that when it came to the golden calf, that the Levites did not worship the golden calf. They stayed true to Moses and true to God. So I think the fourth thing that people were thinking, that this really applies to the Levites, at least, maybe more, but at least to the Levites. And this is that they were thinking that Moses would still come back. Moses would still return, that God was still speaking to him at the top of Mount Sinai, that they weren't finished yet with the time that they would spend together, and that they had faith that Moses would return, and when he did return, that he would have good news for them, that he would bring blessings from God for them, and that he would return victoriously from the time that he was spending at the top of Mount Sinai. That one day this would really be a celebration time for them as a tribe and as a people, and that Moses would actually return. And the fact of the matter is that if all of the people could have waited just one more day, that's exactly what would have happened. But on the 39th day, they'd lost their patience. They did not think Moses was going to return to them. And so they turned to Aaron for all the reasons we said, and they are now demanding that he make a God for them who will take them into the promised land, because they cannot do it themselves. And if Moses isn't coming back to do it, then they need a God, an image of a God who will do it for them. So, one other thing I want to say about this too is when they say here, make us a God who will go before us. The word there used for God is Elohim. Elohim. It's a common name for God in the Old Testament. Grammatically, in its form, it's plural. So it would be gods, plural. However, it can be used in a singular way. So when it's translated, Elohim could either be translated as gods, plural, or as God in the singular. So if we look at when the people say, make us a God, what if they were intending for that to be plural? What if they were saying that to Aaron that they wanted him to make them gods, plural, who could go before them? If that was the case, then it would be almost as if they were going back to the religious experience that they had in Egypt, right? Where in Egypt, the Egyptians practiced a religion which had several gods, had many gods. And they were telling Aaron that they wanted gods to go before them, like the Egyptians had gods who provided for them. Again, it's getting back to who's going to provide for us, who's going to give us food in the future, who's going to give us water in the future, who's going to lead and guide us, who's going to protect us, who's going to win our battles for us. And they've seen in Egypt that the belief of the Egyptians, the way they've seen the Egyptians practice their religion, is that there were many gods who did these things. And so what they're saying to Aaron here is that they want to go back to the kind of religion that was practiced by the Egyptians, where there are many gods. And so they're asking Aaron to make gods for them like the Egyptians had gods for themselves. So if it's plural, maybe that's what they're saying to Aaron. But if it's singular, and if it's just translated as that they want a God to go before them, then how are we to understand that? They want an image of a God, a singular God, in a form that they can see. Again, because the Egyptians had gods whom the Egyptians could see. They had idols of those gods, they had images of those gods. So maybe what they were saying is, we want an image or an idol of a god whom we can see, like the Egyptians could see their gods. So make us an image, an idol of a god, singular, whom we can see. Like the Egyptians had that, we want that too. In Acts, it says that in this moment, at the golden calf moment, when the Israelites were demanding that Aaron make this image of a god for them. In Acts, it says that at this moment, that the people's hearts had turned back to Egypt. The people's hearts had turned back to Egypt. And that's why they demanded an image or an idol of a god who would go before them, so they could be like the Egyptians, because that's the way their hearts had turned away from the Lord and had turned back to Egypt. And so this is what they're asking to take place there as they come to Aaron here in verse 1 of chapter 32. But we have to ask, though, that didn't they, what comes out of this is a question that we have to ask, and that is, didn't they know as they were doing this that they were breaking the commandments that God had just given to them? That God had given to them the first commandment, have no other gods before me, and secondly, make no idols of any thing in heaven or on earth, and do not worship anything like that. And so they had just heard God say to them, do not do these things. These are the first two commandments. Well, that is true, but is there a possibility under which they could have done this with thinking that they had not broken those commandments? Is there a way in which Aaron could have agreed to do this without thinking that he had broken those two commandments? And I think there is a way that it could have happened. What if the people are telling Aaron that they want an image of the God who's at the top of Mount Sinai right now? In other words, they don't want some random pagan god to worship, or even pagan gods, plural, to worship. They don't want some random other god who replaces the God who has just delivered them from Egypt and brought them across the sea and who has talked to Moses. They don't want a different God other than the one who's at the top of Mount Sinai right now. But what they want is an image of that God. In other words, they're saying to Aaron, that God that's at the top of Mount Sinai right now, meeting with Moses, who's been up there for 39 days, make us an image of that God. Make us an image of that God. And maybe they were thinking that what God has told them was, have no other gods before me. Well, they're not having another God before him. They're wanting to worship him. So that doesn't break the first commandment if they're worshiping him. Do not make idols or worship idols of anything that's on earth, above earth, or below earth. Well, okay, that's fine, but we're making an image of you. We're making an image of the God at the top of Mount Sinai. We're making an image of Moses' God. So if they look at it that way, maybe they were thinking, if we make an image of Yahweh, the God of Moses, the God at the top of Mount Sinai, the God of the parting of the sea, the God of the plagues, we want an image of that God, then we're not breaking the first two commandments. And maybe that also explains how Aaron would be more willing to help create this golden calf. On the other thing too is that leads even more credence to the fact that they came to Aaron to make this image of that God, because that is the God that Aaron has seen. In other words, Aaron, You've seen that God of Moses. You've seen that God who's on the top of Mount Sinai. You yourself have seen him. We want an image of him, that God, so we can worship him and so that we can see him and so that we can have an image of him and we can and that he can that image of him can lead us on into the promised land. And so it makes sense when you look at it that way. And then maybe again that explains partly why Aaron was more willing to go along with them and do it, because he's not making a pagan god. He's not making a god to replace Yahweh. In fact, he's just making an image of the God that they have already been in relationship with from Egypt and from slavery to Mount Sinai, where they are now. The problem with that, and I remember David Palmer saying one time that the problem with the golden calf is that we do not make God in our image. He has made us in his image. And that's a good thing to think about when it comes to what's happening here with the gold calf and the people at Mount Sinai. So let's go just a little bit more here before we end our session today. We've only gotten through verse 1 of chapter 32 so far. But there's a lot in that verse, isn't there? There's a lot to unpack in that verse. So let's go on then in verse 2. It says, Aaron said to them, tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. So this is a lot of gold. This is a lot of gold. He's going to make this molten golden calf from the gold earrings that they were wearing. So where did the Israelites, having been in slavery in Egypt with nothing, end up with enough gold in their earrings? You're not talking gold on your fingers, talking gold in your ears. I mean, we have 10 fingers, we only have 2 ears, but he's not asking for the rings on their fingers, he's only asking for their earrings, and he gets enough gold to make a solid gold calf. Where did they get all of this gold? Well, remember what happened, right, when they were getting ready to leave Egypt at the end of the 10 plagues and the Passover. Let's go back and look at that just for a minute, just to remind ourselves. It's in Exodus 12. So turn back in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 12, if you would please. And we're going to go to verse 33. Verse 33 of Exodus chapter 12. It says, the Egyptians urged the Israelites to send the Israelites out of the land in a hurry, for they said, we will all be dead. Remember, this is after the death of the firstborn males in Egypt, and they're panicking now. The Egyptians are panicking. They just want the Israelites and Moses out of Egypt. And so they say, if they don't get out of here, we're going to all be dead. Verse 34, so the people took their dough, the Israelites, took their dough before it was leavened with their kneading bowls bound up and the clothes on their shoulders. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have their request. Therefore they, the Israelites, plundered the Egyptians. They plundered the Egyptians. So where did all this gold come from? The gold that the Israelites has come from the Egyptians themselves. But consider how much gold that must have been. I mean, of course, you have 2 million people, right? 2 million Israelites that have left Egypt. But, I mean, we don't know the actual size of this golden calf, how big or small it may have been. Some people think it might have been smaller, but it was lifted up on some type of a podium or something to make it look bigger. then other people think that it was life size, that this was a life size golden bull or golden calf, and might have weighed as much as 600 pounds, 600 pounds of gold, simply from the earrings that the people were wearing, from the plunder that the Egyptians had given them to get them out of Egypt before any more death came their way in Egypt. So this is what made the golden calf. But there's one other thing that I'd like to ask about. There's actually two things I'd like to ask, two questions I'd like to ask about these golden earrings. First of all, I wonder if Aaron asked for the golden earrings of the people, thinking that maybe if he was asking them to give up their own gold, that he was asking them to give up their own gold that they owned and that they possessed, having been slaves in Egypt for their whole lives and having nothing, and now having these gold earrings, this gold now that they own, that belongs to them, that maybe if he was asking them that they had to provide the gold from their own possessions, from their own earrings, that maybe they would not want to give those up. Maybe Aaron's strategy is, if I ask them to give me the gold from their own earrings, that they have to give up to me, and they won't be able to keep it for themselves, but they have to give it to me to make this image of God. Maybe they won't do it. Maybe they'll say, I think I'd rather just hold on to my own gold. Thank you, Aaron, very much. We'll just forget it. We'll keep our gold and we won't do this. And maybe that was one of the strategies that Aaron was using to try to not have to do this. Maybe so. But the other thing we have to ask about is, why were they wearing these gold earrings in the first place? Why were they wearing these gold earrings in the first place? Because actually, they had been warned before. The people of the Israelites had been warned before about doing such a thing. So if you want to look back in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 35, Genesis chapter 35, we're going to see something that happened with Jacob way back in Genesis that had to do with gold earrings and the fact that they had to give up their gold earrings back then. So look at Genesis chapter 35. It's verse 1. It says, "Then God said to Jacob, 'Arise, go to Bethel and live there, and make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau.' So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, 'Remove the foreign gods which are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments, and let's rise and go to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me on the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone.'" And then this is important, verse 4. "So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods which they had, and the rings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was near Shechem." So there's some kind of relationship between the foreign or pagan gods and these rings in their ears. There's some type of relationship between foreign pagan gods and earrings. And so God had already told them through Jacob, do not wear these earrings. Don't wear these gold earrings, because they have some relationship to pagan worship. And so here they are on their way to the promised land at the base of Mount Sinai, with God himself at the top of Mount Sinai, wearing these earrings, which they really should not have even been wearing in the first place. But guess what? Aaron was wrong. They did tear off those earrings. They did give those earrings to Aaron, and now he is going to make their God, who they requested, this golden calf. So we'll end there for this session. We'll come back next time and start on verse 5 of chapter 32, which is unfortunately the lowest point of not only Moses' time in his relationship to the Israelites and to leading them, but also the low point for Aaron, because it says that Aaron, actually, we're going to start next time on verse 4. We'll start in verse 4 next time, because we see here in verse 4 it says, Then Aaron took the gold from their hands and fashioned it with an engraving tool and made it into a cast metal calf. And they said, This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. So certainly the low point for Aaron, but isn't it interesting that they're saying, This is your God, Israel? And I think this is, it says, and they said, but I think this is Aaron saying it in verse 4. Aaron says, This is your God, Israel, who brought you from the land of Egypt. In other words, that God that brought us from Egypt, that land, that God who is at the top of Mount Sinai, that God that brought the plagues, that God that brought the Passover, that God that divided the sea, that God that gave us the Ten Commandments, that God that Moses is talking to right now. This is that God. And so it's a terrible thing. But we'll pick up there next time. We'll see what happens. We'll see what God's response to this is. We'll see what Moses' response to this is. And it's all not good, is it? It's all not good. But we'll take that up next time. And lots of good stuff yet to go here in chapter 32. Have a great one, guys. Talk to you later.